If you've played World of Tanks, you've probably asked or are asking the question of what tank line or tier 10 should I get in World of Tanks, or what tier 10 should I already have? And of course, today I'm going to show you 5 insane tanks that even a newbie to the game would be able to enjoy from day one. Coming in at number 1, this is quite possibly one of the tanks that I feel like everyone should grind towards, because it is a superb tank, because both it features a great learning experience as you go through the tech tree, and of course it also gives you the opportunity to have the all-round stats that both a medium and a heavy tank can love, and that is the Super Conqueror. This is the tier 10 British heavy tank that is one of the ones that I found super fun to be able to go towards, because you have to play through some really good tanks. You have tanks like the Conqueror, the tier 9, which is a very long grind to be able to get the tier 10, so you want to be having a decent tier 9, and it certainly is that. But what makes this whole package all worth your time? It's because it has decent alpha damage, it has good damage per minute, it has good accuracy, it has a okay speed where you're not like super heavy like a Mouse or an E100, and often you can boost it up using a turbo, which I'd highly recommend on this tank, just to get as close to the enemies as possible at the start of the game and relocate. And also you get the whole factor about this tank, which is that brilliant turret armor that is very hard to reliably pen if you are a kind of standard player within World of Tanks. Of course, if you do have premium ammunition and you know the weak points of the turret, it is possible to pen, but even if you know all of them, it's still a difficult shot to be able to land. And that's what makes this tank absolutely brilliant, alongside the fact that it has 10 degrees of gun depression, so it can get on a ridgeline and be a true proper heavy tank, and its turret definitely doesn't let you down in those sorts of positions. And what I love even more about the Super Conqueror is the hull armor as well is actually kind of a little bit troll. Now, it's not perfect. Far from it. It's not going to be able to bounce a ton of rounds. The upper plate can be penned by a lot of people if they're firing premium ammunition at tier 10, but at least you can kind of test out a little bit of side scraping. The engine deck is slightly raised and people can pen you through the engine deck when you do side scrape, but it is a slim shot to the point where it's probably not realistic that they're going to be able to hit you every single time, and most people don't know about it anyway, I guess, unless they've watched this video, which I'm sorry if you're playing a Super Conqueror after this. But it is a very good one. The view range is also okay, 400 meters, nothing spectacular there, but it is still pretty good for a heavy tank, remember. And yeah, just a brilliant all-round heavy, good at brawling, and will be very kind of easy for a new player to jump into, since it's quite forgiving. This tank has a decent amount of hit points, it can bounce some rounds, has a brilliant gun, so you don't necessarily have to know all the ins and outs of aiming, and you can learn to aim a lot better with this tank, as well as pinpoint the weak points of enemy tanks and find out where you need to be shooting things as you're learning the game. And of course, if you haven't already got this tank, I highly recommend everyone should get this vehicle, as it is just a very good, solid and free tier 10 that you're not having to do any challenges for. And yeah, I really did like the entire grind leading up to it, coming from the Conqueror, maybe not so much the Carnarvon and the Black Prince, but certainly this one and the tier 9. So yeah, really good tank. Let's jump into the next one. We had the British tier 10 heavy tank, and why not top it off with this second pick, which is the Soviet tier 10 vehicle, the IS-7, and this vehicle is definitely one of the ones that I think everyone should have. And even if you are a more experienced player and you haven't actually yet picked up the IS-7, it has so much potential to do all kinds of different things, and it is very competitive when used in the right hands, and is a very good learning tank to play as well. It gets slightly higher alpha damage than Super Conqueror, allowing you to trade with other tanks slightly better. You can go up to 60 kilometers an hour in this vehicle as well, which means you can relocate along the battlefield quite nicely compared to the Super Conqueror, meaning that at least you can maneuver yourself, learn how to reposition, and that is going to be really good for a learning experience when playing World of Tanks, which is often what I always like to implore in some of the videos, is that you need to be moving around, you need to be finding out all of the different spots, and the best way to do that is actually to play tanks that are fast, to be able to at least explore the map before you get taken out, because as a new player I'm sure you're used to getting taken out pretty much like I did when I first started playing, and that allows you to essentially just get a more understanding of all of the maps in the game, find out weird positions, find out where people go a lot more, and you're not kind of stuck in the back of the map trying to snipe, because you don't get the experience that you would being in the front lines and positioning yourself like you do with the IS-7, which I think is never really mentioned within World of Tanks. And often you'll find the people that start aggressive and start trying to figure out where they should be going are often the players that end up with higher win rates in a lot shorter of a time, because they have that exposure to more gameplay like that older players who maybe sit at the back, and I'm not talking about age-wise, I'm just talking about players who've played for longer, just don't have that experience because they have sat at the back the entire time in their tank destroyers. And yeah, I mean, it is a big change to get forward and actually try and understand the game. So the i7 definitely does that. Obviously trading with tier 10s is very nice with the 490 alpha. Your penetration is decent, so you're not lacking a whole lot in that regard. Maybe the premium penetration is not insane, but it is still okay with 303mm, which means you will have to learn weak points, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it will teach you for tanks when you do get the higher penetration the value of having that higher penetration, which is always nice. And of course you get 6 degrees of gun depression, not the worst, but at least it teaches you once again that you don't always have the 10 degrees of gun depression that tanks like the Super Conqueror have. And of course you've got to find unique positions where you can get hold down that will be super useful for when you are playing a paper hull armor tank that really does rely upon having that turret armor to make it really work. And of course it is just a very good overall tank in general, and has the ability to ram opponents if you want some enjoyable gameplay where you just don't really care that much and you just want to ram into someone at top speed to take their entirety of their hit points. Number 3 then is the E50M, the German tier 10 medium tank that is a hybrid between having good DPM and all of the factors that a medium tank would have, but also combines it with armor that teaches you to angle. It's super important that you learn these sorts of things and how you can take out other opponents, and one of the best ways is to learn how other people are doing it to you, and more experienced players are doing it to you. And so the E50M is a really good kind of tank to actually learn. You can side scrape with it against other medium tanks. You have the speed of 60 kilometers an hour to move around. You have the ability to ram other mediums if you are kind of getting lost in the source and you end up in a bad position. You never know, you might be able to ram as well. And you have very good accuracy, 0.29. It's the typical German accuracy with this vehicle. You've got 390 alpha and a reload of about 9 seconds. That's the base reload, so it gets even better, allowing you to really have a good overall experience, as well as having 8 degrees of gun depression. The E50M also got a turret buff recently, I say recently, in the last couple of years I believe, which makes it slightly better. And yeah, it's definitely a tank that I feel like a lot of people will enjoy, and I don't think anyone's going to complain about it, because once again it gives you that survivability that some of the other mediums wouldn't have, and that allows you to get away with some more things as a newer player or someone that's less experienced at World of Tanks, so that you won't feel like every single time you make a mistake you get 100% punished, but instead you may actually get away with it. But you should always remember that you should be learning from those mistakes and not just saying, well, oh, I got away with it, therefore I'm going to do it again. So yeah, you just got to be wary with those sorts of tanks. But this one definitely gets away with a little bit more than something like a Leopard 1, which takes some different aspects about World of Tanks where you don't get that armor whatsoever and you have to utilize it in a different way, and usually those methods are slightly more averse to someone that's experienced at the game, and you can always move into that after you've found out how to play the E50M, and it is a great starting point for a medium tank, that kind of hybrid between the more armor than a traditional medium like you'd see with the Leopard 1, and of course some of the British medium tanks like the Action X and stuff like that. So yeah, really good tank. I think it has the all-round nature that you need as a new player, whilst providing you some comfort when it comes into those slightly harder scenarios where you maybe can get away with a little bit more. Number 4 then looks at the Swedish medium tank, the UDES 1516, and although this tank is slightly kind of different from the traditional medium tanks in the game, in that you have the siege mode mechanic where you can get increased gun depression and you have some weird values that aren't necessarily the same as some of the other tanks that you have to learn, and maybe if you haven't learned everything, this tank would be slightly more difficult to play, but I feel like it's a good starting point for someone that is wanting to learn how to play mediums and how you can trade with opponents, which is something that is one of the biggest things which you can accelerate your own gameplay and be able to get an increased win rate if that's what you're after, or just be able to be slightly more competitive against the people that you're supposed to be fighting, which is always good and obviously leads to way more fun when you can actually do something against your opponents. And that's because what you can do with this tank is you can get hold down and use the turret armor that this vehicle has to be able to then basically be unpennable for the most part if you're using the turret armor correctly. There are a few weak points, but they're not massive, and it can take a few rounds from range to be able to reliably hit them. The tank also, as with some of the other medium tanks in the game, it does get a kind of larger caliber gun that gives you the 440 alpha damage compared to the typical 390 to 400 damage that the other tanks have, which means you don't have to expose yourself as much with this tank comparatively to those other vehicles, and that allows you to kind of play it in a role where, you know, you can make more thought out decisions. You're not constantly rushed to get the next shell off to make the tank optimal, and as a new player that extra bit of time is always really nice, and you can use it to kind of think about the scenarios that you're under, which might take a newer player slightly longer, or someone that hasn't got that experience. And hopefully you guys will understand, and if you are a more experienced player, it'd be interesting to see what you guys think about this tank, as I know it's somewhat controversial to have in a beginner tank, but I feel like it is a good experience learner, and even if it isn't as easy to just quickly jump into some of the other vehicles, I think that you learn a lot from playing tanks like this. And it also tells you about how armor angling works with that turret armor, and of course using the gun depression as well, and just giving you a load of different things to think about and learn from when getting this tank too. So yeah, in my opinion, it's a great way to get more experience, and you'll probably leave this tank line looking for another tank line at the end of it, and you'll feel way more experienced within World of Tanks than you will if you were to just pick, I don't know, a random tank destroyer as your first tier 10. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can learn from this one. And then the final tank is definitely a controversial one, as I'm sure you guys will probably see that if you have played World of Tanks for any length of time, and that is the AMX 13105. But let me caveat it, because it's not because this tank in particular is amazing or like super overpowered or is very easy to play. It's mainly because I feel like this tank line is something that people will benefit from massively, because what you have with this tank is an autoloader, so you get to experience autoloaders. You'll understand how they work when you've played through this tech tree line, as they pretty much all have autoloaders from tier 6 onwards in this tank line. The tank line is also very good in the lower tiers. The AMX 12T is a brilliant one to actually stop on and play maybe more than you need to before you get the tier 7, so that you understand a little bit more about it. And it also teaches you how spotting mechanics work. You'll learn a lot. It would be probably very punishing to begin with, but once you get over that initial stage of just feeling like, I just haven't quite got light tanks right, the American light tanks are very good at that. And also they have the autoloaders, which can make up for the fact that maybe you don't know when you should be firing, and so you can unload all of your clip on someone that maybe you YOLO at the end of the game to get more damage than you would with something else. And often It's actually the firing in the first place that gets you spotted, so if you can do it all in one go when you're just spotted once, will slightly help you as a new player if you don't understand the spotting mechanics as well. So I felt like I had to put a light tank in here because you need to at least experience it so that you know how to combat light tanks, the sorts of things that they're good at, how spotting works, how autoloaders work, because they are a key part of the game, and autoloaders are always very dangerous within World of Tanks, and people often stay away from them as a newer player to the game because they think, oh well, I don't really want to get involved in them because they're the hard class to play. But if you don't play them, then you never really understand how strong they can be and the advantage of them, and how you can trade with an autoloader in the reverse scenario when you are playing in the single shot. So I feel like that this tank is a good one, mainly because of the tech tree line and because it does expose you to some things that you might not see. And I think exposure, like I've said in this video throughout, is one of the key things to learning the game and becoming a better player in World of Tanks, because if you sit there doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to actually get any better. If you're sat at the back of the map and just waiting for your team to either win by 15 tanks or lose by 14 tanks and you're the last one alive, then you're not really going to have learnt much, and when you're against 13 or 14 tanks in one go on your own, you're not going to get any experience from that other than just being removed in about half a second. So there is a lot to learn from tanks like this, and hopefully this has given you a good idea as to not the overpowered tanks in the game, because there are tons of those and they typically aren't tech tree vehicles, surprise surprise, but yeah, they are. These are some good ones that I think you will learn from, and as a newer player, learning is the biggest thing that you'll do, and you can make a tank that you can learn a lot from, make you better, which means you're going to perform better in the long run, and I think that that is something that has to be said. And yeah, you can disagree, and I'll be interested actually to see what you would change, whether you'd add more tanks, would you change some of the picks, do you argue against picking an autoloader or a light tank as one of the tanks that you should get first, so that you experience that, or do you think that you would be swapping out for something like a TVPT 5051, this Czech tier 10 medium, or would you be picking more heavies like the VZ55 or something in that ilk? Yeah, let me know in the comment section down below, and if you want to see more videos like this, or have found it interesting, informative, or learnt just something, then if you do subscribe, it will be a massive help to the channel. And if you don't want to do that, then just like the video, as that would be massively appreciated, and it helps it spread to more people so they can see a different opinion, as you usually get with these top 5 beginner tank videos. So thank you and goodbye.